Where's Ansel?
He's been in and out of here at this room.
There he is. Yeah. Okay, Ansel. I'll make it. So everybody, we're going to start in a moment. Before I introduce David, or you all know David, but I'll introduce him anyways. So the ISGAP team, actually, we're very happy with the help. Where's Amy? Amy Cooper. With the help of Amy Cooper and the ISGAP team, with Misha and other people, ISGAP got a significant grant recently. And because of the good work of Amy and the side of the development team of ISGAP, we've been able to receive a grant to help develop the network of ISGAP, to really connect people and to try to do projects and to do some maybe microfunding of research and things like this. And I'm very honored to be able to share with you that Ansel Brown, who's here, a longtime colleague at ISGAP and friend, will be the director of the network program at ISGAP. So he's joining our team. So yeah, it's great news for us. And Ansel, thank you for embarking on this journey, or continuing the journey. So thanks. Cool. And actually, at some point, we should discuss maybe with everybody here what this implies. Cool. So thank you. And as everybody knows, to my right is David Patterson. You've heard him this week. And David is also a longtime friend and colleague, as you know. I think David came to the first ISGAP Summer Institute as a scholar, and he took me for a whiskey, and we've been friends ever since. Started talking about the metaphysical aspects of all sorts of issues.
Yeah, the whiskey helped.
It did, at least with me. So David will be speaking today, and he's a senior research fellow at ISGAP. He's the professor at the University of Texas at Dallas and the former head of the Ackerman Center. He's published on all sorts of issues, and he's a scholar and a gentleman. And I'm very honored to have David here again, and as a friend and colleague. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Charles. The title of my talk, as you can see, is Antisemitism Morally Required in the Wake of 10/7. In many quarters of academia and other areas of the intelligentsia and institutions, you cannot be considered a moral person if you support the existence of the Jewish state. The Jewish state is regarded as evil, not because of acts committed, but because it's Jewish. They get blamed first. They get charged with apartheid, genocide, racism, colonialism, not because of anything they've perpetrated, but because they are Jewish. Okay? So if you want to be counted among the redeemed, you obviously have to oppose the state that embodies all evil. One of my repeated phrases is that the premise for the anti-Semitism is not that all Jews are evil, but all evil is Jewish. Okay. And I have this discussion. I open this discussion with faces. Those of you who are students of Emmanuel Levinas know his famous teaching that the face forbids us to kill. The face forbids murder. The prohibition against murder emanates from the face. The hatred of the Jew renders the Jew faceless and therefore legitimizes the murder of the Jew. According to a Harvard Harris poll taken last December, get this, If the poll's anywhere near accurate, the poll says, according to the poll, the majority of Americans between the ages of 18 and 24, college age, believe that, quote, Israel should be ended and given to Hamas. Not just ended, but given to Hamas. Now, what are you turning Israel over to? Who is Hamas? Tomorrow I'll be talking in much more detail about who Hamas is, where they come from, the genealogy that leads to them. But this is Hamas. This is an image of a child's bedroom. Could be from Nahalos, Kfar Aza, Magen, Be'eri, Sufa, Nir Oz, any number of the communities where people were savagely, not just murdered, if only they had only been murdered, butchered, raped, dismembered, burned, babies put into ovens. Okay, I don't want to leave that there too long. The slaughter took place on the 23rd of Tishrei on the Hebrew calendar. You all know it was a Saturday, I'm sure, Shabbat, which in itself is laden with significance in Jewish tradition and teaching, but it was also happened to be Simchat Torah, known as the Simchat Torah massacre, which on that day in Israel was also Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of gathering together. The teaching is that during Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, God asked Israel to host the nations, bring in the nations. During Sukkot, 70 sacrifices were brought to the temple for the 70 nations. So God is having a celebration with humanity. And it's after that party, all the guests go home. He wants to spend a day with his family, the Jews, with his witnesses, with those who were asked to be his witnesses, chosen to say to humanity, every human being is chosen. Every human being is infinitely dear. Every human being bears an infinite responsibility, okay? It's rejoicing in Torah. And let me just say right now that Yehya Sinwar has boasted that while he was spending 22 years in an Israeli prison, he learned all there was to know about Jews, Judaism, Zionism, etc. The Nazis typically scheduled actions against the Jews on Jewish holy days. I think tomorrow I'll talk about relation between Nazis and Hamas, but I think they're doing that also. I'm not saying it's the only thing, the only piece that brought about this day. There are others. I have friends who tell me, oh, it didn't matter, they didn't care, it was Simchat Torah. I think they knew what they were doing. Children were specifically targeted. I've heard accounts from survivors of that day who would tell about parents who would hide their children in some room or something, and parents would get killed, and the Hamas butchers would go through the house looking for the children. Children are regarded as Torah scrolls. Simchat Torah, a celebration of Torah, is a celebration of children. And you see the scroll here, open to Bereshit bara Elokim, the first line, which on this day, we read the last page of Torah and just without pause circle back to the first page. In the beginning, God created. The But the significance of children, there's a mystical text called the Tikkunei HaZohar, which says the children are the face of the Shekhinah, the divine presence. The Talmud teaches that all of creation is held up, is sustained by the breath of little children. Not by power, but by holiness. The Zohar says, asks, who is it that upholds the world and causes the patriarchs to appear? And the Zohar says, it is the voice of tender children studying Torah. For their sake, the world is saved. So if you're at the risk of reading too much Jewish stuff into this is an assault on God, on Torah, on every Shabbat. Shabbat is one of the names of God. Children are the face of the Shekhinah. So this leads us, this tells us something about what the anti-Zionist is anti, exactly. What is Zion? Zion is referenced more than 600 times in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible. All of you, I'm sure, who have ever been to synagogue have heard, the Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah. The Torah goes forth from Zion and the word of God from Jerusalem, from the prophet Micha. Simchat Torah is Simchat Zion. And I've also been told by some colleagues, well, the modern Zionists who were behind the modern Zionist movement don't care about these biblical references. This is not true. I've recently gone back. I'm thinking of doing something about what is Zion, Zionism, etc. They almost all of them, from Yehuda Alkalai to Moses Hess to Achad Ha'am, Ben Gurion. Most of them secular, yeah, but they all invoke, at some point in their writings, almost all of them, the Bible. They do. You can't tear the word Zion from its history. So when we hear the pro-Hamas protesters, as I've heard on my own campus, death to the Zionists, what are they saying? Death to what? Death to what? In Independence Hall, some of you perhaps have been in Independence Hall in Tel Aviv. It's a passage from the prophet Amos. What's on the second floor of Independence Hall? It's kind of a mini museum on the Bible, right? You can't tear Zion from Scripture. You don't have to believe in Scripture as revealed word, just as part of the history of human consciousness. The word has a place. Right? The national anthem, Hatikva, written by Naftali Hertz Imbar in 1878. Imbar was brought up in an Orthodox home, but the hope of 2,000 years, Eretz Zion, Yerushalayim, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. Zion and Jerusalem are often, depending on the context, interchangeable. Andre Neher. I like this quote from, do any of you know Andre Neher? Very important French Jewish thinker. He says, Zion, which is only a fragment of Jerusalem and the land of Israel, is a word one can neither play around with, nor play tricks with, nor beat around the bush with. It is the key word of the meta of Jewish history. Through Zion, Zionism becomes bidimensional. The vertical interlocks with the horizontal. The anti-Zionist is anti-dimension of height, anti-revelation, anti-tradition, teaching, testimony, everything that Torah represents. Without Torah, there's no Am Yisrael. Without Am Yisrael, there's no Torah. I'm not suggesting that they all think this through, but you don't have to think everything through in order for your actions to have implications. It's dimension of height, dimension of holiness, without which we're turned over to just the horizontal, which is nothing, is a realm in which nothing is true and everything is permitted. Power is the only reality, and weakness is the only sin. This is a Simchat Torah celebration, lots of dancing. You can't, you dance with the Torah on Simchat Torah. You can't do Simchat Torah without dancing, right? And in many segments of Jewish tradition, dancing is a form of praying. The Hasidic masters used to tell their congregants, your dancing counts for more than my prayers. The tzaddik is saying this. Right? This is the celebration in Gaza. The Gaza civilians celebrating that massacre, celebrating. Those of you who have looked for this, read this, know about the mind-numbing savagery of the rape of women, torture of men, women, children. This is their reaction. And you should have seen them when the videos were posted. Here's a celebration at Harvard, which is typical of many campuses. About 330 campuses in the U.S. had pro-Hamas demonstrations this past year. More than 120 had these encampments. I mean, it pervades academia. And what originates in academia spills into the streets, inevitably. The academy is the epicenter of this firestorm of Jew hatred that has spread over the globe, and as I said, and into the streets. Now, anti-Semitism historically is conceived of, articulated, encouraged, implemented by the intelligentsia, the educated, the theologians, the philosophers, the ideologues, from St. Augustine to Martin Heidegger. Okay? It's not something that comes from the illiterate, the ignorant, the uneducated. They get exploited, but it doesn't originate there. And of course, what are you pro exactly if you're pro-Hamas? I am Hamas. You've all seen this footage on the news, right, from students. We are Hamas. The graffiti on the monuments in Washington, D.C., about a week or two ago, Hamas is coming. Article 15 of the Hamas Charter, again, I'll lay more of this on you tomorrow, ends with the refrain from the Hadith, the Al-Bukhari Hadith, I will assault and kill, assault and kill, assault and kill. To this, they added, and rape and butcher and torture and burn and behead and maim and dismember. Not just kill. This is an evil that is manifest not just in killing. You understand? Here we go to the academy. And I speak as a professor, and I know many of you are professors or students or otherwise affiliated with institutions of higher learning. What makes it higher exactly? What makes higher learning higher exactly? Ask that question at your next faculty meeting. I mean, you all know this story. You can't get a condemnation from these presidents of the top universities in the world. The stewards of higher education. And here, we start to broach the question, complicated question concerning what is driving the so-called red-green alliance. How is it that people whose thinking, understanding, learning stems from a tradition of liberalism and enlightenment get in bed basically with Hamas? This is kind of a link. Sima Shaksari, women's studies professor in Minnesota, possibly. I don't know if she's Jewish or not. I don't know. No evidence of rape. This can't be confirmed. And anyone who says that Hamas raped anybody is a racist. Okay? It's like, and she went on in that statement to compare it to the old canard that black men prey on white women. Right? It's the same thing, she says. The same as, which is like the intersectionality at work here. I'll talk about intersectionality a little more. But how is this connection made? The red-green alliance. Well, we'll see.
Just people were wondering about the surname. The surname Shahsari is Iranian.
I think that's right. Yeah. Okay. So how does this enter the academy, the discourse, the thinking? In the history of modern thought, and this is necessarily oversimplifying, admittedly, but there is what I call a turn inward, a shift toward the ego, an egocentric understanding of many different kinds of issues. Whether it's the sola fide of Luther, by faith alone, it's my inner faith that justifies me. Cartesian, I think, therefore I am. The Kantian idea that to be free is to be autonomous, not affected by anything outside of yourself, which would be heteronomy. And to be autonomous is to be self-legislating. Kant had no use for the Jews because they follow commandments that come from outside themselves. It's a slave mentality. You got the Wagnerian shift to the inner passion, the nationalistic, folkish passion of the nation, the people, Nietzsche, will to power. It's an inner resolve that authenticates me. Now, Franz Rosenzweig, very important Jewish thinker in the 20th century. Rosenzweig died in 1929. Huge influence on Levinas and most Jewish thinkers who came after him. Rosenzweig comments on this by saying, corresponding to the Copernican turn of Copernicus, which made man a speck of dust in the whole, is the Copernican turn of Kant, which, by way of compensation, placed him upon the throne of the world much more precisely than Kant thought. To that monstrous degradation of man, costing him his humanity, this correction without measure was likewise at the cost of his humanity. Why? Because it's at the cost of relationality, relationship. Who we are lies in a between space. The soul draws its breath, the neshama, its neshima, from a between space of human to human relation. Okay? This turn inward is an undermining of that, precisely the relation that constitutes any understanding of sanctity, holiness of the other human being. And this is part of the modern process of, what I call thinking God out of the picture. All of the major socialists were anti-Semites, socialist communists. They have to be. They have to. It's like Clermont-Tonnerre before the National French Assembly, 1789. Famous remark to the Jews, everything is individuals, civil rights, etc., but nothing as a people. There can be no people apart, and there sure as heck can be no Jewish state. It doesn't jibe with this universalist utopian thinking, which in the end is almost always totalitarian. And these are some statements just to prove my point. Should I read them? Sure. And these guys, most of these guys are atheists, by the way. Right? There's never been a nation more despicable than the Hebrews. Fourier. Toussaint, I understand the persecution that the Romans, the Christians, and the Muslims made the Jews suffer, and our contempt is a legitimate retribution. Proudhon, it is not for nothing that Christians call them deicides. The Jew is the enemy of the human race. Proudhon was an atheist, by the way. But the Jews kill the false gods. From the time Abraham smashed the idols in his father Terach's shop, the Jews have been idol smashers, or in a way, deicides. And of course, Marx, who of all the thinkers of the 19th century, probably has the greatest influence on academics today, certainly in humanities and social science. The emancipation of the Jews is the emancipation of mankind from Judaism. Okay? Judaism is the contagion. Judaism is the source, the tradition of teaching and testimony that undermines everything else. So, thinking God out of the picture. what is the ground of the holiness, the sanctity of the other human being, and why should I care about another human being? Where does the responsibility come from that devolves upon me? The Jew is the biggest obstacle to getting rid of God. For these thinkers. As long as God's witnesses are hanging around, God's hanging around in a way. You know, we're taught in the Sephra commentary on Deuteronomy, it says, when you are my witnesses, I am God. When you're not my witnesses, I'm not God. Arthur de Gobineau, check this out. The racial problem overshadows everything else. In Jewish teaching, the sanctity of the human being lies in two areas. One is every human soul is an emanation of the Creator. You saw those kids with the Torah scroll open to Bereshit, but first folio, first page, Bereshit bara. In the beginning, God creates heaven and earth. When God says, let there be light, first utterance, we're taught he created every soul. Every soul is metaphysically connected to every other soul through the source, through the Creator. And physically, each of us is tied to the other through Adam. Why does God begin with one and not two? At some point, it's going to take two. We're taught in a text called the Tosefta that God begins with one so that no one can say to anybody else, my side of the family is better than your side. We're all family, with all of the obligations that devolve upon a family member toward the other. B'nai Adam, child of Adam, Ben Adam. Each of us, the word for human being, Ben Adam. Each of us is connected to each other. Now, do you see, if race becomes the first principle, what sets in is a radical disconnection over against the radical connection that the Jews espouse, just by their presence in the world. This is something that de Gobineau has in common with critical race theory. Critical race theory is widespread in academia and in society. And it's also part of key to what's known as intersectionality. Okay, is everybody still with me? Kimberly Crenshaw is a very important figure here in the use of the term intersectionality, famous for an article from 1989 in which she discusses ways in which racism and sexism are interconnected. Legitimate enough, but one premise that she adopts is race is the first principle in determining who and what and how important a human being is. Okay? This is Kenneth Levin's take on intersectionality. Levin is a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. I guess, shall I read this? Intersectionality is shared victimhood of groups victimized by white male racism, its history of imperialism, colonialism, exploitation, and slavery. Among the prominent anti-Semitic intersectionality allies in academia are ethnic activists, LGBTQ, activists, feminists, and others on the political far left. Extending beyond academia is a certain intersectionality with this is my take, with white supremacists who are also anti-Semites, right? Neo-Nazis, jihadists, unwitting perhaps, but there, I think, and others whose Jew hatred is legitimized by the guardians of higher learning. If my professors have contempt for the Zionists, it must be morally legitimate. Don't you, if you're 20, want to not just please your professors, but in some cases emulate them? So critical race theory. This is, there's Gobineau's point that the racial problem is at the center of every other problem in history is a premise that CRT can adopt, although Gobineau, as you know, situated the white races as superior to other races, you know, the inequality of human races. But it's not how you structure the hierarchy. The question is, what is your first principle? What is the basis for understanding the dearness, the importance, the value of a human being? And these are some of the tenets of critical race theory in most of its forms. Race functions for CRT much in the same way as class does for Marxism. The difference is that, at least ostensibly, the Marxists want to get rid of the class structure. The CRT theorists want to maintain the racial division. In fact, they say it can't be overcome. It's impossible. Race is the first principle, as I mentioned. Race is a legal and political category of power. Race is about power, the acquisition of power. Most of the critical race theorists, historically, going back to the 70s, were in law schools. Okay? Ego-centered narrative, which I talked about. Unbridgeable gaps separate us. White privilege is the source of all evil. And of course, Jews are white. Now, the absolute wrong response to this is, well, what about Ethiopian Jews? What about, Mizrahi Jews? What about, Jews of color? You're buying into the categories. It's not about color. It's about power. White is at least not reducible to the color of your skin in this thinking. So here's Crenshaw. I mentioned her as one of the main critical race theorists. And this is it. Racial political power determines human value, determines the standing of the other human being. It determines how we understand ourselves. Okay? You can see this is in conflict with the view that I just suggested concerning the holiness of every human being as taught in Torah. The neighbor and the stranger. Neighbor and stranger. V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, v'ahavta l'ger kamocha. You shall love your neighbor, kamocha, as yourself, and the stranger. The kamocha means basically who you are that loving relation. If you are not in that loving relation, you are not who you are. Your humanity is diminished. And it's la re'echa, not et re'echa. It's be loving toward your neighbor and toward the stranger. So it's not about feeling a certain way. It's about treating the other person in a certain manner, whether you, especially if you don't feel like it. And the commandment concerning the stranger, not of your race, not of your political persuasion, not your religion, not your tribe, etc., is repeated 36 times, more frequently than any of the other commandments, because it doesn't come so naturally. Ibram X. Kendi, he's one of the main figures of CRT. And this is the thinking. This looks twisted, I know. But he says, the most threatening racist movement is not the alt-right's unlikely drive for a white ethno-state, no. But it's the regular American drive for a race-neutral one. In other words, the real racist is the one who wants a colorblind society. And of course, Jews deny that. Judaism is Zionism, and we'll get to this. Zionism is racism if you don't support Hamas. This isn't Kendi, this is me. You're a racist because Zionism is racism. Okay. I'll take questions at the end. The equation, the intersection, intersectionality, intersection of Zionism with racism, of course, infamously comes with Resolution 3379, which was pushed by the Soviets. This is also at the time when the PLO was gaining observer status and legitimacy on the international stage. Largely thanks to the Soviets as well. The support from this point, and yes, I know it was rescinded, what, 9 years later, but the cat's out of the bag. So any support for the Jewish state is racist. To be a racist is like the worst thing, right? It's kind of the default, well, you're a racist. And of course, Robert Wistrich, one of the major seminal scholars of anti-Semitism studies, has this observation that by the early 80s, the distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism was he thinks, early on was erased. And it certainly is widespread throughout the academy. Tammy, do you know Tammy Rossman Benjamin, the Amcha Initiative? It's a good source of information. One of the challenges for our students is they don't know where to look for information. As we saw earlier, social media is the last place to look. But there are reliable sites, starting with ISGAP. Amcha Initiative is a good one. Combat Anti-Semitism Movement's a good one. There's several good ones. But in the academy, these are just a few of the professors who I think have to be called out. These are historic. Some of these have passed on. More professors. Now, these are famous individuals, scholars. These are not assistant professors out of graduate school. No offense to assistant professors out of graduate school. Well, that one. People are taking photos. I mean, you know Joseph Massad, Colombia, very famous. Gil Andajar, others, Edward Said, infamous, right? Edward Said did a lot to lay the groundwork for legitimizing Jew hatred in the academy. And he continues to have a huge influence. There's some others. Some of these, well, a number of these are Jewish, but you have the phenomenon of the good Jews. And it's a modern phenomenon ever since the Jews have been allowed to step inside the door of the academy, 19th century, to try to get a seat at the table. They've had to check their Judaism at the door. I mean, read Heinrich Heine, right? And prove that I'm a good Jew. I'm not like those others. God forbid, I'm not like the Ostjuden or the Talmud Juden. Anyway, I'll stop with that right there. But you remember in 2020, when Israel was discussing replacing military authority over communities in the West Bank with civil authority, and the world went nuts saying, oh, they're annexing the West Bank, which they were not contemplating that at all. It was during the Abraham Accords negotiations, and the Israelis, to try to push along the Abraham Accords, said we're going to abandon this idea. More than 400 so-called scholars in Jewish studies signed this statement denouncing this move, this annexation move, not as a bad idea, you're going to compromise security, it's not going to fly with the international community. No, they used the language of this is a crime against humanity perpetrated by an apartheid state. Academic associations that have either passed pro-BDS resolutions or brought it before. Some of them are famous for the heated argument over BDS. But these are associations that in some cases have little to do with Jews or Israel or Zionism or Chicana and Chicano studies, really? Now, what about the students? Who are these students out there saying, we are Hamas? By now, I'm sure all of you have heard of Students for Justice in Palestine. There's an excellent article by Charles Small and myself on the ISGAP website on the national organization. It's like 90 pages. Just to explain who they are, where their money comes from, deeply tied to Muslim Brotherhood. When the protesters this past year have been arrested, up to half of them have been found not to be a student or a professor, not from outside the campus. They're professionals. Where's that money come from? Comes from a number of sources, among which Muslim Brotherhood. And you see the intersectionality here of Jews and, well, in the next slide, Nazis. And this is what the part of the chanting you hear. As you know, Israel be free, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. We all know what that means. Death to the Zionists. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar is a prayer glorifying God. When Hamas was beheading babies and raping women, they did that to a prayer. Ahmed Yassin, the founder of Hamas, taught that killing Israelis and killing Jews is an act of devotion, something holy and pleasing to God. It's not a night and fog operation. Intersectionality, BDS, founded in 2005 by Omar Barghouti. Boycott, divest, sanction. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with what that is. Barghouti is famous for statements like these made at UC Riverside, that the world Jewish conspiracy, canard, the blood libel, Israeli soldiers go hunting for children every night. Black Lives Matter. This is part of, again, the phenomenon of intersectionality. All victims are interconnected and all perpetrators are the same, starting with the Jews. This is why you must wonder, where does this LGBTQ for Palestine come from? How is it that more than 130 women's studies organizations can sign off on a statement that includes the line, the Palestinian cause is the feminist cause? Okay. It's the Palestinian issue is the same as the issue of racism in America. And if we don't end the Jewish state, we're doomed. It's like South Africa. Melina Abdullah, BLM, Los Angeles. Jews invade the campuses, causing Islamophobia, racism, intolerance. The Jews are the source of these evils, is the idea. October 8th, I'm sure you all saw this image from BLM Chicago. It's all but iconic. Nihad Awad, the head of CARE, Council for American Islamic Relations, loves Yusuf al-Qaradawi, the late al-Qaradawi, head of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Qaradawi, who is famous for saying the mission of the Brotherhood is to complete what Hitler began. Okay? And these are all of these people are have their own intersections with the left-wing intelligentsia in the academy and in society, and in politics. Pramila Jayapal, Israel is a racist state. What is morally required when faced with a racist state? What is the moral imperative? It has to be done away with in one way or another. Of course, we have members of the squad here. This is, in the halls of Congress, the anti-Zionist Jew hatred in some quarters has become legitimized, acceptable. There's no outrage and outcry from within their own party. The response is from the Democrat Party is, well, we're opposed to all racism. No mention of anti-Semitism. I'll talk more about Hajj Amin tomorrow, but you see where this moral requirement goes. To do what is morally required. Required for what? Required for our redemption, our purification. Required to be counted among the righteous and the redeemed and not among the damned. There is a longing in most of us to be regarded as a good person, right? A good guy, a good, what do we say in Texas, a good gal. Most of us want to be good, and this is one of the most insidious aspects of how the professional organizers of pro-Hamas demonstrations, who know exactly what they're doing, they prey on the goodness of kids, basically, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, who know nothing. When there was a group, 21 were arrested at UT Dallas, where I teach. Among them were 3 professors. And I personally think students should be held accountable, treated like they are human beings, that is to say, responsible for their actions, but the professors even more so. The 40-year-old professors know what they're doing. Maybe the 20-year-old kids don't. If they don't know, they're even more culpable. So, killing a Jew is an act of devotion. I mentioned Ahmed Yassin's statement, and again, I'll talk a lot more about Hajj Amin al-Husseini, Ahmed Yassin. So, this is the morally required anti-Semitism is what Shaul Friedlander has called redemptive anti-Semitism. In redemptive anti-Semitism, the struggle against the Jews is the dominant aspect of a worldview in which other racist themes are but secondary appendages. Redemption would come as liberation from the Jews, as their expulsion, possibly their annihilation. This redemptive dimension of Jew hatred can be found both in theological and ideological Jew hatred. Whether you have the promise of paradise in the next world or the promise of a utopia in this world, the Jew is in the way. The Jew is in the way. So, here's the eternal Jew. It's the Jew here is not anyone or anything that you can see. The Jew hatred is a first principle. As I sometimes put it, Judaism, Jew hatred, rather, hatred of Jews, Judaism, is not a subset of racism. Rather, it's not a form of racism. Rather, racism is a form of anti-Semitism. You have to establish an anti-Judaic understanding of holiness of human. And the Judaic understanding of holiness of human undermines race as a first principle, right? We're all B'nai Adam. You have to establish that in order to arrive at a racist outlook. So we know, Hamas is referred to many, many, many times in the media, but my guess is not many people know who they are. Most people think they've heard of the Holocaust. I don't know. I'm probably wrong. Do most people know who these guys are? I don't know, but very few know who these guys are. Well, Ismail Haniyeh, maybe they know who he is. But they don't know. I've heard people, friends, others say, boy, Israel kind of overreacted when they took out Haniyeh. I mean, assassination, isn't that going too far? And I try to tell him, this guy's not some shopkeeper in the market or something. This is a seriously evil person. And here we have the accomplices. They're not the same. Nazis are not the same as jihadists. Jihadists are not the same as the academics that aid and abet them. They are not the same. Nazis are Nazis. Jihadists are jihadists. Anti-Semitic academics are anti-Semitic academics. They are not the same, but they are connections. And this is where it leads. This is where it goes. This is what's at stake. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I know there's going to be a lot of questions. I'm going to start off. First of all, your work is essential to the field of contemporary anti-Semitism studies, and it's very powerful. Your work on the Muslim Brotherhood and how anti-Semitism is rooted in Western thoughts and Christianity and enlightenment is really essential to understand how ideas are rooted in our society and how they're being manifested today. And and as you're speaking in a very powerful way, I'm flipping the phone as we brace for, a kinetic attack by the Muslim Brotherhood ideology on the Jewish people, which is imminent. Auspicious words and auspicious times. But as you were speaking about the piece of critical race theory and the Black Lives Matter movement, I kept thinking to myself, ISGAP needs to have a workshop, a conference, where people on dealing with issues of race, contemporary issues of racism and contemporary issues of anti-Semitism really, I think, need to come together and learn from each other. And I want to push back a bit in the sense that the Jewish people are, there's an explosion of anti-Semitism, and it's a time of, Elie Wiesel said in 2003 that we're living in a time of great urgency, and then he corrected himself to say we're living in a time of an emergency. So from 2003 to 2024, it's a very serious time. And at the same time, issues of racism in the United States are also very, very serious. And there's more marginalization and fragmentation in the African American community. There's all sorts of issues of racism and marginalization being reinforced. And when we speak about the legacy of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, we're dismissed in many, in some circles, in some scholarly circles, as being white privileged, and our experience is dismissed. And I'm afraid that our dismissal of critical race theory and the Black Lives Matter movement also equally dismisses very serious issues for, a significant portion, 10, 12% of the American population, the African American population. So I think that we really need, both communities really need to understand each other's condition. And it's kind of a more, it's an emergency for the Jewish people, and I think it's a very urgent time for African American people as well at many levels. And I think there has to be nuance, because I would argue, and you'll feel free to respond, that there's the Black Lives Matter movement, which ISGAP, actually, we closed down for 2 days in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And this, what we closed down for in solidarity with the African American community, was this organic movement of people fighting police brutality and racism. And there's a difference, in my view, and feel free to agree or disagree, between the official organization, which has been marked by, ugly, naked anti-Semitism, which you pointed to. And I would agree that the organization is really problematic, but this sort of mass movement that was supportive of the African American community and denouncing police brutality and racism, I would argue is significantly different. Some agree or disagree. So I think that at the political level we have to, I think, engage that, and also the critical race theory and issues of scholarship dealing with racism. And looking at the oppression of the African American population and the history and the legacy and the contemporary context, there's a lot of very important scholarship that deals with that issue, and I don't think it should be dismissed, particularly when we're trying to deal with understanding another form of hatred. So feel
Thank
free.
you. No, thank you. I'm not dismissing the importance of that at all. In fact, it's to a large extent, it's not the reason why civil rights matters. The reason why racism matters is this holiness of the other human being in whatever form. If you look at the Jews have a history of activism in civil rights issues. You yourself were in South Africa, right? There's a famous photograph of Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, also a preacher, and Abraham Joshua Heschel praying together at the Arlington National Cemetery. Abernathy's holding Torah scrolls. Okay. The civil rights matters. Racism matters precisely because the dearness of the human being is not reducible to race. It's not contingent upon race. If you have leadership in Black Lives Matter making statements like that, it's incumbent upon the organization to call them out, I would say. So you see,
But what happens? You live in a society where people feel that they are racialized, that they don't have a choice, that the society economically, socially, politically is placing them in a category that they don't have the power necessary. Our society has a racial formation.
Isn't that what happens when the Jews are labeled as white? Isn't that the dynamic involved there? It's a racialized society.
Yeah. And it's never, yeah.
I mean, Ibram X. Kendi is a perfect example of this thinking. No, it's because racism does matter that we have to expose what anti-Semitism is, what anti-Semites are anti. Levinas says anti-Semitism is hatred of the other human. Elie Wiesel has famously said that what begins with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews, and I want to say, why doesn't it end with the Jews? It's crucial because it's about how anti-Semitism, it's about how we understand humanity, and it undermines the very teaching that puts us in a position to call out racism as evil. Evil. So I don't dismiss that for a second, believe me. I'm trying to get at why it's evil, why it matters, why power is not the only reality. And the problem of racism, I know we have this power discussion once in a while. Political power is essential to getting anything done, to do the P in policy, in ISGAP. But it's not, if all we have is a power struggle, then we are doomed as humans, as human beings. Then nothing is true and everything is permitted. So I think with a Jewish approach, Jewish teaching, which is essential to addressing when you're addressing anti-Semitism, what it at least opens up, and not just Jewish, there are other traditions, but anciently Jewish teaching opens up or sheds some light on the matter of why it matters. What's at stake? That's mine.
Thanks. Darren?
At times, I wondered what was the learning objective or the outcome of
Sorry, it's hard to hear. Thanks, Social.
At times, I wondered what was the learning objective or the outcome of this lecture. I wonder, are we hoping to correct Jew hatred by promoting Hamas or Palestinian hatred? Would we do better with examining why does humanity need a scapegoat? I'm not sure if critical race theory does not believe humanity can't get over the idea of race. I believe we're treading on thin ice. We should criticize the scholars who have exploited critical race theory or intersectionality rather than oversimplify the nature of these thoughts and disciplines. At times, the lecture used scholars as tropes and stereotypes of scholars rather than examine why these people have been hijacked by the winds of the moment.
Okay. I don't know that, naming individual examples of scholars, I'm not sure makes them into tropes. I mean, if you can, look at their work, look at their thinking as individuals, as thinkers. For some people, they can, as I touched on, the good intentions, the desire to be good, to do the right thing can be exploited or lead somebody to be taken advantage of or something. But the scholars whose names I listed are not uneducated or immature or, or easily manipulated. Noam Chomsky wrote the introduction to Robert Froissart's book, The Problem of the Gas Chambers, a Holocaust denial book. So yeah, I agree that critical reading, critical examination, investigation is always called for, even when you think you've come to, especially when you think you've come to a conclusion. Especially when you think you've come to a conclusion. But that's all I have.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up to that point, and I couldn't agree more with Charles' statement. I think he said everything I would want to say and more. So I won't expound upon that, but particularly in reference to my friend's comment about the scholars, do you feel like the representation of Kimberly Crenshaw was a fair and accurate representation, or were you actually presenting an assessment of her statement which was actually opposite of what she was saying?
In what, in the article of 1989 or in
the
later
quote
writings?
the quote of Kimberly Crenshaw, which was posted. In my view, the assessment of that quote was presented in a way that was actually contrary and opposite of the point that she was trying to make, which is that all people are in fact created in God's image, and that systemic racism is contrary to this Judaic truth. But I haven't seen the quote in its contextual form, so I can't go further, but just from the snippet that I saw.
I'll go back. Thank you. Ansel, I trust your wisdom. If Kimberly Crenshaw says all people are created in the image and likeness of God, and that's why this is a problem, I take it back. If that's what she says. And I'll check.
Yes, every once in a while, and it's not often enough, we can recognize somebody, some deep thinker who has the courage to speak truth. We don't get many Robert Wistridges, and we don't get many David Pattersons, and I want to thank you for your courage.
Thank you, Gloria.
I was wondering, you had said that PDS was deemed as anti-Semitic in the US and Germany. I was wondering if they were actually forbidden or if it was just deemed as anti-Semitic. and in Switzerland, where I'm from, I don't think it was deemed anti-Semitic. How would I get it deemed anti-Semitic?
I don't know how you get BDS declared to be anti-Semitic. The U.S. State Department has declared them to be anti-Semitic, and at least half a dozen other countries have officially made that statement. But they're not criminalized for that. And the BDS is widely popular in academia in America. Where I am, we were about to hire somebody for a faculty appointment, and of course I'm doing my homework. What have they written? What do they think? And this individual had written an article heavily supporting BDS and arguing BDS doesn't go far enough. And I pointed this out to my colleagues. They said, that's not a problem. You're just making it political, they told me. I said, yes, but BDS has been deemed anti-Semitic by several governments and many organizations. But I mean, how that works requires some kind of advocacy on the part of people sympathetic to your cause. But what is the ultimate aim of BDS, as stated by Omar Barghouti? It's the destruction of the Jewish state. And Barghouti has been banned from entry into the U.S. because of his ties to terrorist organizations. So I don't know how you go about getting the Swiss government to say this is an anti-Semitic movement, unless you have politicians or other advocates who are willing to bring that before some governing body.
Hi, David. Thank you very much. I want to go back to something that you said before, that is that Nazis are Nazis and jihadis are jihadists, and then anti-Semites in academia are different. And they are all different. But I want to argue with that, and I want to hear your take on that. Because what I think is that the mechanisms that drive the ideology behind all that is basically the same thing. I think that anti-Semitism actually opens the door for a deeper conversation, a conversation with ideology and the ideological thought. Hannah Arendt said that Nazism, as a paroxysm of fascism, saw the Jew as a spot in the history of the race of humankind. Communism, as the paroxysm of socialism, saw the Jew as an anti-revolutionary agent to be removed off the train of history. So basically, these mechanics, they can be traced being the same driving force behind the ideology as a mechanism for managing ideas, or in my point of view, it's a question ideals. And all ideologies, in my point of view, tends to conspirations, basically, because that's when you centralize explanation for everything, then the hypersimplification of history tends to conspiracy and obviously anti-Semitism. So I want to hear your take on this.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. What the ideologies have in common is fixed formulas and ready answers. The solution, and also what the Jew has in common in their eyes is that the Jew undermines fixed formulas, ready answers, and the solution. Yeah. In fact, the Jewish tradition encourages disputation, machlochet, right? Argument, questioning authority, questioning God, right? Which is alien to the theological, creed-based forms of anti-Semitism. Questioning the authority,
Of the great leader of the ideology.
the great leader, the Führer, the party, wokeism. You'll be canceled if you question the premise. So that, yes, they have that. That is a thread. What makes them different, I guess, is the manifestation, the extremity of the expression. But, as Levinas says, I go to Levinas a lot, he says is the anti-Semitic slur just an innocent, prejudice remark like any other? And he rejects that idea, and he goes on to say, the anti-Semitic slur is an exterminationist word. So at the end of that line of thinking is Auschwitz, so to say, extermination, which is the ultimate purification. The Jew is a contamination and impurity to ideology, theology, other totalitarian movements. You have the limpieza de sangre in Spanish Inquisition, purity of blood. Nazis making the world Yud and Rein. If you read Said Qutb, he speaks in the same purist terms. Jihadism is a purist movement, right? And to the extent that there is an ideological agenda at work in academia, and there is, it's also there to purify the system. If you're at many schools, and including where I work, you have to take a DEI test, and you have to take it repeatedly until you get every answer correct. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to dismiss, the differences, and they have nothing to do with each other. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about the genealogy of what I call this evil from Hitler to Hamas. So there is a genealogy, a connection. So, I mean, thank you for asking me.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Patterson. There are some people that are trying to compare 10/7 with the Holocaust. Can you state the reasons why it can be comparable or it cannot be comparable, please? Thank you.
Yes. How is 10/7 like the Holocaust? The 10/7 is a fallout from the Holocaust, I would say. It's not the same as the Holocaust, but again, Julio, what's driving it is very much the same. Both of them, as I suggested about 10/7, are about killing God, killing the God of Abraham. Tomorrow I'll demonstrate that with regard to the Holocaust more completely. But the Hamas sees Judaism as the contagion. It's in their charter. And Judaism is about teaching and tradition concerning the God of Abraham. The Nazis have the same view. So Hitler said to Hermann Rauschning in the 20s, when I come to power, I will get rid of the God of Abraham and his life-denying 10 Commandments. So they're
We will be pagans again.
the false gods, yeah. So what is the idea driving each case is, the ideas are very similar and connected, as I will show tomorrow. But what happened outside of Gaza is not Auschwitz. It's not killing units. It's not, they were a killing unit. But it's, each event has its own defining characteristics. And I resist. One reason why I resist saying one thing is the same as the other is that it doesn't require further thinking or analysis. But I would say there is a connection between the Holocaust and what happened on 10/7. There is a connection, and tomorrow I'll talk about the connection.
Thank you, Professor Patterson. In your slides, one of the slides shows a list of institutions which are anti-Zionist academic intersections. And I saw that there are a lot of, you mentioned a lot of gender studies scholars. And can you explain the logic why these people are particularly against Israel? And also I saw Association of Asian American Studies there. As far as I know, those who belong to Asian American Studies, usually diaspora Chinese in America, or some Jewish professors who
Yeah,
are dealing with
yeah.
China studies. So I would love to know the logic behind that. Why particularly these association or this discipline scholars are so anti-Israel? Thank you.
Well, that's a good question. Many of these ethnic studies organizations, so-called, or area studies programs, are studying issues that we receive from victimized groups or marginalized groups, traditionally victimized, marginalized, oppressed. So this is kind of an intersectionality thing where all victims, whether it's homosexuals, Native Americans, or women, share the same standing and status. And the perpetrators are basically, the oppression's basically coming from the same direction, from the privileged, the powerful, in many contexts from the so-called white. So if the Israelis are perceived as the racist, the apartheid state, the colonialists, the oppressors, the perpetrators of genocide, of course they're in the category of oppressors, and all of the oppressed will oppose them in kind of a solidarity. So it doesn't rest upon, in the academic associations, it's not about engagement with Jewish studies, Jewish thought, and there are plenty of examples of scholars from Jewish studies, Jewish thought, who have anti-Zionist points of view. But the other organizations see themselves as champions of the oppressed. The Israelis are the oppressors. Zionism is racism. So the Jewish state has to be opposed, logically.
David, just thinking out loud, the other night at the Habab House, we talked about the core of Judaism, which is the Shema, hearing and doing. And today you said Judaism is the contagion. So I just wonder if it's worth exploring and just your view on this. But is it possible that, when you think about Marxism, which for them salvation is a godless utopia, Islamism, for them salvation is a world caliphate, Christianity, for them salvation is ruling and reigning with Christ in a Jew-free eternity, right? And in the world in general, salvation is a world without God. Someone once said, the Jew brought the God-given moral law into the world, and for this has never been forgiven. So as you were talking, I just had that thought. Is it in your thinking that perhaps what drives anti-Semitism in all of these isms in the world is that the Jew is preventing them from their idea of salvation?
Yes, thank you. Salvation comes with a final solution where everything is settled. The accounts are settled. I'm no longer in arrears. I am saved. And here's the Jew saying, no, redemption is not settled. Salvation isn't settled. You might put it another way, the Messiah is not here yet. There's no guarantee. Your responsibility to and for your fellow human beings remains unfulfilled, at least not completely. In fact, the more you respond, the more responsible you become. The debt increases in the measure that it's paid. So you're crushed under debt, it seems. But without that weight, we are crushed under the weight of emptiness and meaninglessness, seems to me. Another way I sometimes put this is to say that anti-Semitism or Jew hatred is God hatred. God asked the first murderer, "Where's your brother? And what have you done?" Anti-Semitism is hatred of the question and of the one who asks. I don't want to be bothered with where is my brother. Am I my brother's keeper? It's not my business. I don't want to have to answer for what, have I done enough? If I answer I've done X, Y, and Z, it's never enough. You know, people used to line up with the Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, saying, "Rebbe, on Sunday afternoon, the 32nd meeting, I've done this X, Y, and Z, I've accomplished this," and the Rebbe would always say, "And what more are you going to do? You're not done." We're never done. We can never answer the first question to the first human, which comes to humanity through the Jews, and humanity, like the first human, doesn't want to hear it. We go into hiding. Where are you? Where are you? Ayeka, where are you in relation to God and humanity? What more will you do? What have you done? And Adam said, "I was afraid, so I hid." Where did he hide? According to the Midrash, one Midrash. Who said that? Oh, I think I mentioned that to you. Zahava, good.
She was listening.
He hid inside the tree of knowledge. Isn't that where we hide? From the voice of the Holy One? Because we're afraid. And the Jews will not allow us any sleep. No, there's no place to hide. And historically, we humans will kill people who rob us of our sleep.
So we're out of time. We have like a minute. I just wanted to say, when I studied here in Oxford, I had two supervisors. One was a Marxist, David Harvey, famous Marxist scholar. The other was Carrie Peach, who was a Chicago school empiricist. And the beauty of these two scholars was that they never told me what to think and what to do, but they critiqued me constantly, poking holes in my argument so that my argument would become stronger. So they never told me what to do, but they wanted me to actually kind of create the best possible thesis, the strongest possible thesis that I was capable of doing. And that's true scholarship. And sir, even though we don't always agree, you inspire me, and I know you inspire everybody here, and really with your wisdom and scholarship, and thank you. Thanks for amazing us. And I'll just say, I think as ISGAP matures, and the scholars in the room, you know, we're all fighting anti-Semitism, we're fighting for the right to Israel to exist, we're fighting or trying to educate about the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's essential. But for the scholars in the room, this is not a political movement as such. We rigorously have to constructively and with respect critique each other so that our work becomes stronger. And I think this is we say we have ISGAP only conversations. As the study of contemporary anti-Semitism develops, we should be able to critique each other with respect and help each other do better work. So thank you. Thank you for creating the space for this.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you.
Just a quick reminder.